Good afternoon, and welcome to this week's edition of Deeper Waters. I'm so glad you guys could join me today, and I just have some really interesting teaching and stuff to share with you guys. As you know, we're talking about Nehemiah and Ezra and that whole group and what happened when they were trying to rebuild the temple and why that's so important and why is it applicable for today. So we're going to get right into this because your time's valuable and so is mine. And I really am excited to share with you today from the book of Esther. So there's a lot of things from Esther that we can learn aside from just the normal routine things that people always teach about Esther. And so we're going to dive right in. We're going to look at some Hebraic roots and we're going to talk about Esther and how she's contemporary with Ezra and Nehemiah and how that fits the big picture. And most importantly, of course, what that does for us today. How do we apply that to today? And so Ezra and Nehemiah were contemporaries of Esther. I don't know if you knew this, but they lived at about the same time. Okay. Esther was contemporary of Ezra during his second return, and Nehemiah, who came a few years later. And so, as we know from the chronology of the history in those days, first of all, we know Nebuchadnezzar conquered Israel and conquered Jerusalem and Judah and led everybody captive, brought Daniel back as a youth. Um, and then when Daniel was an old man, he was reading in the book of Jeremiah and realized that, hey, wait a minute, 70 years of captivity is up. It's time for us to go home. And so Daniel fasts and prays, as we know, and gets the answer that, yes, the 70 years is up. And so, in response to that, Nebuchadnezzar, of course, dies. And we have King Koresh in the Hebrew, or Cyrus. Most of you know him as Cyrus. Cyrus is raised up, and God lays it on his heart. We talked about this before last time. God lays it on his heart to send a contingency of the Jews back to Jerusalem to start rebuilding the temple. God told a heathen king, you need to build my house. And he said, yes, sir. And so Cyrus goes about and starts that rebuilding process. And he sends Ezra and many with him and supply and all that stuff to Jerusalem to rebuild the house. Okay. And so we know that Ezra is there in Jerusalem for a period of time. But King Cyrus goes, and now Artaxerxes becomes king. And Artaxerxes was just kind of a flip back and forth kind of a guy. So for a while, he's like, yeah, I'm okay with them rebuilding their temple and rebuilding Jerusalem and all that. But then he gets evil reports from the Samaritans in the land. And we talked also in previous broadcasts about Sanballat and Tobiah and those guys and why they were so bad and what was going on with that. So they send nasty letters to Artaxerxes and accuse the Jews of all kinds of stuff that hadn't happened. And so Artaxerxes believes the letters and believes the lie, and he stops the building. So Ezra comes back to Babylon, and so Ezra is back there for a number of years. And then Artaxerxes decides, oh, well, I guess you can go back and rebuild. And so Ezra now takes a group of priests with him and he goes back, and we talked about this last week. He goes back to Jerusalem. But when he gets back there, he discovers that there's sin in the camp, the exact same sin that led them into captivity. He discovers that not the people necessarily, although they probably did too, but the leaders and the priests had defiled themselves. They had committed spiritual adultery by marrying heathen women. They had done that which was forbidden to do, and the thing that led them into idolatry and gross sin that caused them to go into judgment in the first place. And so we've got all this spiritual adultery going on over there. Ezra fasts and he prays and cries out to God. They come up with a solution, which the priests and the leaders agreed to do. And we talked about all of that last week. And so now we've got this whole cleansing process in order. And the reason this is so important is, if you haven't noticed, we're in a serious, serious spiritual warfare battle these days. Okay? Serious battle. And so the serious battle that we are in, we have to know how to war properly for the day and time and the age in which we live in. So in order to know how to war properly, the first thing, first and foremost, most important thing we have to do, guys, is make sure our hearts are clean and pure. If we have any unconfessed sin, any besetting sin that we haven't really pressed in and asked the Lord to deal with, we got to get those doors closed. Because in the season that we're in, we're going to get demonized big time if we don't shut all those doors. We have got to walk in holiness before the Lord. If we know there's something that we're doing wrong, we need to do whatever it takes to make sure that we get that out of our lives, whether it's closing doors on generational bondages, whether it's just confessing that sin or bringing it out in the open, confessing to someone you trust. Don't just tell anybody because the gossip machine gets going. But tell somebody you trust, have somebody walk with you in this. We have got to get our hearts clean and pure before the Lord in this season. That's critically important. The demons are raging and they're looking for everybody they can take out. And especially the people of the living God who are so strong in the things of the Lord, that's who the enemy is going to come after first. So we have got to deal with that. So that's what Ezra was dealing with, spiritual adultery, things that grieved the heart of God when he came back. And so a few years goes by, and Artaxerxes, he's still the king, okay? And he throws this ginormous party, great big fancy party. I mean, it's a big deal. Read in Esther chapter 1, it's a big deal. That guy spends more money. It's like, oh my gosh. But he throws this big party. Everybody's getting drunk. They're all hooting and laughing and partying like big time. This is not a one-nighter, guys. This is a big multi-day, went on for a long time party. Okay. So he throws this big, huge party. And in the course of the party, he wants to show off his wife. Now she's having her own little intimate party with her friends, and so he summons her, but she refuses to come. Big mistake on Vashti's part. She refuses to come. So his anger burns within him. How dare the queen refuse to come when I call her? And so his advisors tell him, you know what? The word's going to get around that she just basically said, talk to the hand. And pretty soon wives are going to be disrespecting their husbands everywhere. So we suggest you put her away and give the crown to somebody more worthy. So he liked that idea. And so he did. He put her away, removed the crown from her. In the meantime, um, several more years goes by because he gets involved in another war, and that war didn't go very good. He comes back licking his wounds, and he's all depressed and discouraged about how that went. And he remembers now that what Vashti did and that she got put away. And so what happens now is that his advisors come back to him and they say, you know what? Remember when you put Vashti away? We suggested that you just get a whole bunch of brand new virgins from around the city, around the area, the region, and pick one of these girls to be your new queen. And so that pleased the king. Okay, so that's what happened. And so we're going to pick this up in Esther 2 verses 7 and go through some things. And I want to show you some other points that are critical for the day that we're in. So Esther 2:7 says, he, Mordecai, had raised Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, because she had neither father nor mother. The girl was shapely and good looking, and after her father's and mother's death, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. So now we're back in Babylonia. We're in Shushan, the capital, and Mordecai has a position of authority, and he gets to actually sit in the gates and help make decisions. That's what he's doing. Hadassah is his young cousin who he has agreed to adopt it. So now Hadassah is without parents. Her parents have died, and so she's being cared for by her older cousin who does have a position of authority in the city. So Esther 2:8 says that the king's order and decree is proclaimed. And after that proclamation of that order, many girls assembled in Shushan, the capital, under the care of Haggai. He's the keeper of the king's women. Esther, too, was taken into the king's house and put under the care of Haggai, who was in charge of the women. So I want you to see some things here. First of all, Esther, or Hadassah, which is her Hebrew name, was probably already promised to a nice young Jewish man. because as we've already seen, Ezra went into intense weeping and fasting and repentance because of intermarriages. So, by this time, the Jews are not going to be intermarrying with anybody. So chances are good because Mordecai was sitting in the gates. He got a whiff of the order ahead of time, and he probably told Hadassah, hide, do not let them see you because they will take you, and this is what they're going to do to you. But somehow or another, Hadassah was out in the open, or somebody, probably more likely than not, somebody said, hey, that house over there, there's a beautiful young girl over there. Hadassah was taken. And it's interesting that the king already had a harem, because if you look at the scripture, we have Haggai who is in charge of the women. He already had a harem and he had a bunch of women, but he didn't want to choose from them. He wanted a new batch, okay, because he's the king. And so Hadassah, who had probably already been promised to someone else, was in hiding. They came and took her anyway, and they put her in the harem. And so now we're thinking, this is not good. And I'm sure Mordecai was going, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Okay. So I want you to see this because in this particular scripture, there are two different Hebrew words that are used here. It says, many young girls were assembled and Hadassah was taken. Two different words. So assembled in the Hebrew means collected or brought up or brought themselves up. So some of these young girls actually positioned themselves to be taken because they were like, well, either I got a chance to be the queen, which is hot stuff, or I can be in the king's harem and I will be taking care of the whole rest of my life. I will be lavished with perfumes and jewels and clothes. And for some of these young girls, it's like, wow, escape a life of poverty and drudgery and get that. And so some of these girls are going, I'm going to be in the king's harem. And so a lot of these girls had assembled themselves. They brought themselves up and said, here, pick me, pick me. Hadassah didn't. It says in the Hebrew word for take, Hadassah was taken. It literally means to take or seize. So she was seized against her will, where these other girls, some of them may have been taken as well, but they were like, they were right there. They're like, pick me. I want to do this. Okay. So now Hadassah's been scooped up and taken to the palace with all these other women, all these, and probably all of them, most if not all, were teenagers, scooped up, taken to the palace. So I want you guys to really put yourself in Mordecai and Hadassah's position. Think about how you would feel, as a man, especially if you're caring for a young girl and she gets scooped up and hauled off to be basically somebody's sex slave. How would that make you? That would grieve your heart, grieve your heart. Conversely, if you're a young teenage girl, how would that make you feel if you're just minding your own business and behaving yourself and you've submitted yourself to your father, your parents, and all of a sudden you get scooped up totally out of the will of your own? I'm sure she was frightened. Mordecai was frightened. He was grieved for her. But I want you to see, and of course, we've got hindsight, so we know what's going to happen to Hadassah. But she didn't know at that point in her life that God had other plans because she trusted the Lord. She was submitted to her God and submitted to her father figure. So let's look at the word Hadassah and see what Hadassah means. We know that she called herself Esther, and we're going to get into that reason. And Esther basically is taken from Queen Ashtarti. Ashtarti was a fertility goddess that was popular in those days. So Esther is from Ashtarti, and we know it means star. And so basically, it was, the name of Esther was given for those who wanted to honor the goddess Ashtarti. So, but of course, this girl's name was Hadassah, and she did go by Esther. So Hadassah means myrtle tree or bride. So I want you to start catching the picture of the bride of Messiah as I go through this. Myrtle trees are a symbol of peace, cleanliness, and the fragrance of heaven. They're used in the Feast of Tabernacles, where it says the branches of thick trees or boughs are used to decorate the tops of the booths, the tabernacles during the Feast of Tabernacles. Those thick trees are myrtles. Myrtles are thick, bushy trees, and they have a blossom with an extraordinary fragrance to them. And so we're talking here about the fragrance of heaven being positioned as a covering. Okay. So Hadassah is a picture of the bride of Messiah. When you go to a Jewish wedding, if you ever get a chance to see one of those, the bride and groom are joined together under the chuppah. The chuppah is a covering over them. It's the same picture as God hovering over them, or tabernacles when they're in a tabernacle under the Lord, and the picture of the covering. And so now we've got the fragrance of heaven. We've got the myrtle tree, or hadass in Hebrew, that's part of that covering with the fragrance of heaven over top. So I want you to see that the very thing that submits to being a part of the building is positioned to be the bride. So when you submit yourself as part of the building, in other words, you are part of the body of Messiah. This is not a Lone Ranger thing. So here's my next major point. The first one is get yourself clean. Okay. The second one is you need to be joined together with other believers, not a Lone Ranger thing. The enemy will pick you off. He will pick you off if you start running around out here all by yourself and you're not submitted to a good, strong apostolic training center. You're not flowing in your giftings and callings and operating with other believers who can walk alongside of you, pick you up when you fall, you pick them up when they fall, and you're flowing together to catch the vision from heaven and pull that down into earth, and you're moving in that direction. So you have to be submitted yourself to him and allow him to position you in the building where he wants to. That's his choice. It's not your choice where you go to church and the people that you run with. You want to run with people that God's called you to run with. And I hear this from people all the time. It's like, I can't go to that church. That church is too far away. I would have to drive 45 minutes or an hour one way. Well, guess what? If God's planting you 45 minutes or an hour one way, you better make the drive, because it's going to totally transform your life to be where God's planted you. You know, just because the church is 5 minutes away doesn't mean that's where God's planting you. For a long time, I've driven to churches 45 minutes and an hour away because God planted me there. And yes, I had churches 5-10 minutes away, but that's not where God wanted me. If you want to dry up and blow away, then go to church 5 minutes away. If you want to step into the plan and purpose God has for your life, go where you're called. And so Esther went where she was called. She didn't want to be there, but she went where she was called, and she submitted herself to that and submitted herself to Mordecai. So I want you to see this. Is this the devil's attack, or is this God's purpose? And of course, we all know, because we know the end of the story, hindsight 2020, we know the end of the story. But this we know from before. So if you're looking at it from Esther's perspective, now she's sitting in the palace waiting for her turn with the king and wondering what her future is going to be like, knowing she's never going to be with that young man unless God provides her a miraculous deliverance. Okay. She had no choice. She was seized by force. Okay. Devil's attack. That's what it looks like. Or God's purpose. So let's see how God's purpose played out in this. So Esther 2:3 says the king should appoint officials in all the provinces to gather all the young, good-looking virgins, and we know they did this, to put under the care of Haggai, the king's officer in charge of the women, and he should give them the cosmetics they require. So that was his job. Okay. So let's see how this looks. Romans 8:28 says, furthermore, we know God causes everything to work together for good of those who love God and are called in accordance with his purpose. Okay. So was Romans 8:28 only for new covenant people, or what did it apply to Hadassah? Do you think, is God bound by time? He is not. He is outside of time. His word is who he is. That's outside of time. And so we know that even though Hadassah was considered Old Testament, she could claim a similar promise to Romans 8:38. All things, okay? So all things don't work together for good for any old person. You have to love God and be called according to his purpose. She was called according to his purpose, although she didn't yet know it, and she loved him. And so she had the conditions, she met the conditions of this promise. So she could claim everything is going to be good for me. I don't understand it. I don't know what's going on right now. I don't get it, but everything is going to work together for good because God promised that. Okay, so I want you to catch that. That's the next major point. Everything, everything means everything, right? Everything works together for good. Even though we're on the backside of the promise, we don't understand what's happening to us. And I want you to see this. There's people around the globe right now don't understand what's happening to them right now. And they're traumatized and they're afraid and they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. If you love God and you know you're called, trust him. His shalom should be filled. As a matter of fact, right now, in the name of Yeshua, I just release your shalom over everybody watching this broadcast, that you know that you know that you know that everything is going to work together for good. You don't understand what's going on right now, but you will understand, and you'll see that on the other side. Okay? So Hadassah could claim that promise. So let's look at what happens when Hadassah becomes Esther. So Esther 2:10 says she did not disclose her people or family ties because Mordecai had instructed her not to tell anybody. So here she is submitted to Mordecai. Mordecai sits in the gate, so she gets to talk to him still from time to time. It's not like she's gone. Okay. Another thing we see is she gets favor. So she's so pleased, the keeper of the women, and won his favor. So he lost no time in giving her cosmetics, gave her portions of special food, and he assigned 7 girls from the king's palace to attend her. He promoted her and her girls to the best place in the harem's quarter. Now that's favor. And I want you to see, as you read through Esther chapter 2, especially, you're going to see multiples of 7. When you see multiples of 7, guys, that's the end of a cycle. An old cycle is passing away and a new one is getting ready to begin. Okay? And so here she has favor. Why did she have favor? Because God was positioning her and he made sure she had the favor she needed to be positioned. The next thing I want you to see is Esther goes through a 12-month purification process. Okay? Oil of myrrh and other cosmetics. Okay? Esther 2:12. Each girl had her turn to appear before the king after she underwent a full 12-month preparation period prescribed for the women, consisting of 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and other cosmetics for women. Okay? 12 is important here. 12 is not only is it a governmental authority number, but you've all heard people talk about we're in the 11th hour. It's 11:58 or 11:59. 12, when the clock strikes 12, then that's it. We're out of time. There's no more time. And so at the end of 12 months, there's no more time. That's the end of the preparation period, and we're going to step into being the bride. I want you to catch this picture. If you can think about Esther as being a typology of the bride of Messiah, you will see at the end of the purification process, remember, he's coming back for a bride without spot or wrinkle. So at the end of the purification process, 12, there's no more time. Then it's time to stand before the king. Are you ready? Have you been purified? Have you gone through the purification process? So I want to show you here what is so important about myrrh. Okay. So the myrrh tree, and I put a picture of a myrrh tree as the icon-y thingy, for this broadcast. So take a look at that again. The myrrh tree is distinctive due to its white flowers and knotted trunk. At times, the tree has very few leaves due to the dry desert conditions where it grows. It can sometimes take on an odd and twisted shape due to the harsh weather and the wind. In order to harvest myrrh, The tree trunks must be cut into to release the resin. The resin's allowed to dry and begins to look like tears flowing down along the tree trunk. The resin is then collected. You think that's how Hadassah felt? I'm sure that she felt like she was going to dry up and wither away, that she was put in this horrific place of testing and tears. That's what's going on there with Hadassah. Something else you need to know about myrrh is that it's been shown to have potent antioxidant activity, has potential as a cancer treatment, and it's also been shown to be effective in fighting certain types of parasitic infections. Possesses anti-inflammatory and antibacterial properties. So it's healing. So I want you to see this. Myrrh purifies and myrrh heals. Okay? So when you're in the midst of a twisting, testing, dry, hot trial, and you're crying those crocodile tears, just think of it this way. You're in a place where you're being purified, where you are being healed. Okay? That's what myrrh is all about. The world can dry us out, twisting and misshaping us, but deep within we carry the fragrance of heaven. When we're cut into by the world and the enemy, when we cry the tears of sorrow or loss, we leak his fragrance. Catch this. We leak his fragrance. The testing we go through is the very thing that brings cleansing and purity, not only to ourselves, but to someone else that's also going through a trial. So trust the Lord and trust the process. Most Jewish brides will immerse in a mikveh. And so she's soaking in these different perfumes and oils and baths for a year, right? And so before a Jewish bride becomes a bride, she immerses herself in a mikveh, which is a cleansing, spiritual cleansing bath. Whenever someone was unclean in the Old Testament, they had to go to the mikveh and immerse in the mikveh for spiritual cleansing. Okay? So when John the Baptizer came, he didn't have to explain the significance of immersing in water for the remission of sins for purification, because most of the people that he was baptizing had already been immersed in mikvahs before, and they knew what that was. So that's just part of the culture. So she understood that. She was being immersed in a mikvah with various perfumes and oils for an entire year as a part of the purification process. Allow yourself to be submerged in the baptismal waters that the Lord is placing before you so you can come up pure and clean. It's a part of submission to who he is. So now, Esther 2:17, the king liked Esther more than any of his wives. None of the other virgins obtained such favor and approval from him. So he put the royal crown on her head. Okay, so now Esther has become the queen. But she continues to submit to Mordecai's instructions. And as we find out later in the story, that is really going to pay off big time. So I want you to see this. Yeshua is coming back for a bride without spot or blemish. He's returning for those who passionately love him, would do anything for him. Those who have passed the test. Notice that passionate relationship is the requirement, not perfection. God does not expect us to be perfect. He knows we're humans. He knows we're going to make mistakes. But if we're passionate for him, we're in love with him, we know we're called according to his purpose, we trust him in the hard places, then we're going to be quick to repent. He's equally as quick to forgive, and we can move on. Okay? So I want you to see this. At the marriage supper of the Lamb, we are going to be married to the King of Kings. Not just, we are married to a Jewish rabbi, and I've taught this before, but we will be married to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That makes us the queen, guys. So God has removed the crown from Vashti, from the evil one who usurped all the authority in this earth and stole it away from Adam and Eve, and he's replacing the crown on our heads. We get to be the queen. To me, I mean, that's amazing. That is amazing. So we know, of course, from the rest of the story, please read the rest of the story. I'm not going to unpack that today. But I want you to see this, that when Esther was faced with annihilation and her people, she could have hid. She could have stayed Esther and not acknowledged that she was really Hadassah, but she didn't do that. Mordecai beseeched her, you've got to do something. God positioned you for such a time as this. So she prepared herself through fasting and prayer. And then she went and risked her life for her people. And subsequently, a great victory was accomplished. Haman was hanged on the gallows that he built for Mordecai. So she had been immersed in the mikvah. She was baptized into her new relationship with the king. But when the test came and tried to twist her, she drew upon the fragrance of heaven that God had already planted within her, and she reversed the curse. Yeshua also came, and he risked everything in the world for those who would come to him, and even for those who he knew weren't going to come to him. He shed his blood and saved the world for whosoever will. So I want you guys to see this. Sometimes when we think we're undergoing a trial, it ain't the devil, okay? It's a divine setup. So when things go wrong, what assumptions do we make? Do we start rebuking demons before we even find out if that's what's going on? Can we trust him and remain faithful in the middle of the process? Can we trust the process? Will we pass the test? That's so important that we ask those questions of ourselves right now. So Psalms 91:1 promises have conditions. He who dwells, and the Hebrew word there is yashab, to settle in as if to be married, in the shelter or the secret place or covering of the Most High, will abide, which means to stay permanently in the shadow or the hovering over of the Almighty. So let me read this scripture with the Hebrew interpretation of it. He who settles in as if to be married under the secret place or the covering of the Most High will remain permanently in the shadow, the hovering over of the Almighty. If we're going to claim Psalm 91 in this day and age, and we've got to, then we have to meet those conditions. We have to settle in as if to be married. We have to remain there permanently, no matter what happens. We have to allow him to hover over us and breathe on us and cover us and show us what we need to do. Positioning. Be part of the tabernacle. Be part of his building. Let him call you. Let him position you. And then trust the process when everything looks dried up and twisted and you're crying the crocodile tears. He's got a plan and a purpose for you that you don't see if you'll just trust him and be faithful. Hadassah was positioned under Mordecai. They were both positioned under God for such a time as this. And you guys, I can tell you right now, if you're listening to this broadcast, you are positioned for such a time as this. We are positioned for such a time as this. Don't let the enemy knock you out of place and out of position, because that's what he's going to do. He wants to get you separated from the pack so he can take you out. Don't let him get you out of alignment with those that are in authority over you. Okay? Don't let him do it. Don't let him break covenant with your spouse. Don't let him get you out of position with your apostolic leaders. Don't let him talk in your ear and gossip about your friends so that you lose them. Listen, if you hear accusatory voices, what does the enemy do? He's the accuser of the brethren. If he's lying and deceiving you and talking to you, smack talk about somebody else, gossip, slander, throw it out. That's from the devil. Get properly aligned and stay aligned. You will have to be there in this day and age that we're walking into, or you won't make it. It's time for the Deborahs and the Esthers, the mighty men and women of God, to arise. Take your position. press through the battle, pass the test, and allow the fragrance of the Most High to just drip off of you and leak on everybody around you. So, guys, I hope that you enjoyed this teaching and that I showed you a few things about Esther Hadassah that you didn't know before. And I just want you guys to know that I'm just so blessed you joined. Please share this broadcast out. Invite, tag people in it so that they too can lay hold of the promise and spot what the devil's doing and kick him out of their lives. So I just bless you guys, and I just want to release the Aaronic blessing on you. And so may the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face to shine upon you, and be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance before you and give you his shalom. So until next week, abundant shalom to you all. Thank you.